So here my focus primarily has been, what can we do not to test? What can we do to test much lesser? What can we really do to test really rapidly? Of course, tools, technologies are great aids, but I just want to look at some other aspects. The way we think, the way we do things. That's why my title is slightly different. It's in the context of thinking tools, and probably I'll tell you what it means. So what can we do to test quickly? I guess the natural answer, I presume, should be, well, use tools, right? So I mean, exploit technology, automate. Fair enough. I think it's a fairly commonly understood answer. And to a large degree, it seems like we are focused a lot more on the execution aspect. Ability to execute stuff faster, do things faster, do activities faster. But that does come a little later, right? So we would like to see the other activities that we do upfront, which you can do faster, which primarily are not that easily amenable to automation as you would like to think, the way you think, right? That's really the context of where I'm trying to go into. So my entire theme is built around a very simple principle. I think all of us understand that. You may give it a different name, but the whole idea here is testing is a joyful exploration activity. Or I hope you choose it to be joyful. And I'm just going to add to that sentence the center word, which is scientific exploration. So exploration can also be creative, ad hoc, filled with bravado, but here my focus has been to add to that context. So using that as a theme, trying to see what can we do as little tools that allow us to think better and therefore do far more rapidly, of course exploiting whatever tools that we have in our armory. The activity of exploration is a very intensely human activity, aided by, of course, tools and technology. So never forget that fact, there is a very strong human element. But unfortunately in industry, we kind of mess up that, because we make it look like a bit of a coolie job and say manual testing, which is pretty sad because it was never intended to be that way. It should have been human or intellectual or smart or something of that sort. But then we kind of mess it up and then kind of give it the notion of manual, making it look as if I've just got to do work with two hands. And then therefore we put in the other camp the notion of automation and automated testing, thinking it as two dichotomy thing. I mean, there's no dichotomy in this entire process. So to me the whole idea is there is a very intellectual exploration that we are doing, and as and when we get interesting technologies and tools, you exploit it. Much like if we were doing an exploration, maybe you are going to do a trek somewhere, what would you do? You would, once upon a time, use paper charts. But now you probably have far more interesting devices, maybe a GPS watch with an altimeter and a barometer built in one little watch. All you have to do is to spend about 60,000 rupees today. So that's technology. Is that automated? Well, it is technology. So obviously it is meaningful. So aided is important to understand. So the question is, are there some things that we can practice from a thinking standpoint to be able to do this notion of scientific exploration rapidly? And that is where the notion of tools come into the picture. Some of those tools help you to think better. Some of your tools help you to do it better. Do it faster, do it better, and that's where technology comes in very, very handy. So I'm not here to tell you about the human stuff is better than machine stuff, or the machine stuff, intelligent machine stuff is better than human stuff. None of those. They all are one big nice. You just have to live in a very nice, beautiful continuum, right? There is no business of dichotomy in this entire process. And that's the inspiration to me as a picture that, look, I'm trying to explore. And therefore, the whole thing is, what are the tools? And therefore, the title of this entire little discussion presentation is 7 Thinking Tools to Test Rapidly. Okay? That's where I come from. So, what's the first thing that you do before you embark on any exploration? Well, on the other side of my life, outside of my office hours, I do have some interesting things that I do, which involves a lot of outdoor work. So I cycle, I run, and do a few other things. So obviously, to me, that's a very natural notion of exploration. So when you do extremely long distances of running and cycling, it is fairly interesting exploration. Of course, if you are a trekker, then you probably appreciate it a lot more. If you do the mountains, you appreciate it a lot more and so on. But the first thing that you do in any exploration is you do a survey. You kind of do a bit of prep work to find out, okay, where am I going, what am I doing, how's the terrain look like, what are the challenges that are there, and therefore it's a fundamental survey. Now whether you do it by yourself, by doing a reconnaissance of the place, or you use Mr. Google and other maps that are there, that's your choice. And how you do it is also a choice, but you end up doing a reconnaissance. So the first tool that I'm really going to think through is, hey, I am trying to explore my product or my application, be it new or be it modified, doesn't matter. And what am I exploring for? I'm kind of searching for interesting issues. That's all I'm trying to do. And therefore I'm going to use this entire theme and add to this notion of scientific thinking and see if there are some simple tools that can help you do this job, and then see if it's ever possible to construct a technology to do this job. So the first thing that as a tool that I have from a start with, think of these as little tools, a bit of a landscaping tool, or a landscaper as I call them. And all this tool primarily does from a thinking standpoint is to help you do a survey. So what do you survey? So to a large degree, I think there are 4 important pieces of information that you need to have and connect them, and that would form the basis of your survey. And why do we want to do survey? We want to get a good big picture of what are we getting into. So what are the 4 major elements? You want to know, well, what kind of persona, who are the people who are going to end up using your product or application? What are the various kinds of people? It's very natural, right? Nothing very complicated. We know that. You want to really know what are the entities you want to test. So what am I meaning by entities that I want to test? I'm just saying, look, there are small features, there are screens, there are big flows. You may call it whatever you want. You may call it user stories, you may call it epics, whatever term that you give. There is some notion of small and there is some notion of big. So there are very elemental pieces. You may call them as, I'm writing a function, I'm writing a library, I'm writing a service, I'm building a screen. You may call them at whatever you want. I call it a component, building block. At the highest level, there is a sequence of business flows that allow you to do a job. That's the highest level entity. So basically you have entities and you just want to know, do I really know what I'm trying to test? And they will naturally not come in our current model of development all at one shot. So you're going to get little bits once every few days, depending on what your model is. So it doesn't matter. The third thing that you're really going to ask yourself is, okay, what are the attributes that I'm going to be evaluating it for? So you have something to test from a standpoint of a particular persona for something, and that's what the attributes come in. So in the entire process of trying to do this, you're trying to keep these 4 pieces, the last one being the environment. You want to know, today we deploy the product in a variety of different environments. So you want to be sure that it kind of works reasonably well across the plethora of the different environments. So these 4 pieces of information is what you're kind of desperately looking for by exploration, by reading, by talking to people, by whatever forms or fashion, by looking at prior experiences of other people, by doing search on the net, whatever. But basically that's what it is. I'm not trying to put out a mechanism of how to represent them, what to do, etc., because that wouldn't make a lot of sense in these shorter presentations. I'm just trying to give you a bit of a conceptual view, because this is what we use in some of the tests that we perform with customers that we have. So basically in this survey, these are the 4 gross pieces of information that you're trying to get. And what it results really, the entire process is you're just asking more and more questions. You're trying to find out. It doesn't mean you have all the answers. And that's what is the good part, because ultimately exploration doesn't really stop and then start. It's a continuous process. You think you're ready, you jump onto it, and then you refine. That's how it's continuous in nature. So ultimately, I think what we are doing from a philosophical standpoint of view in the context of software engineering is we're just trying to mimic nature as much as possible. And nature is very continuous. It's constantly flowing. So when you really want to implement the philosophy of Agile and all that stuff like the previous speaker talked about, I think it's really wanting to change your mindset to understand that what we're trying to do is basically be in a perfect harmony. That'd be a nice picture to keep. But reality is harsher, so you just ensure that you are trying to use that picture to be in a notion of a continuous flow. So now that you've done a bit of a survey, kind of understood these 4 pieces, what do? You create maps. So if I'm going to be starting to do an exploration, I do a bit of a reconnaissance and I start constructing map depending on what you're doing. And if I am doing running and cycling, I construct elevation maps. Like if I am doing trekking, I am constructing, terrain maps. Or sometimes I am conducting weather maps. I am just doing various kinds of maps when I do exploration. Right? It doesn't have to be that all the maps have to be done by hand. Even if there is a tool, well, use the tool. Right? At the end of the day, that's what matters. So now that you have done the survey, create the map. So what's the map? So what are the maps that we can do? So I'm going to look at some tools which are really map creators. Simple stuff, we know this. So all we are doing is a persona map. We are really saying, who are the users? What are the entities? You got that piece of information, try to make a connection. And therefore you are saying, okay, there are the various kinds of users, various kinds of entities, at the higher level, lower level, middle level, whatever you want, however granularity you want. And then therefore you are saying, okay. So what does this allow you to do? It allows you to be much more sensitive. It allows you to change the way you think. And therefore the notion of dichotomy that we've been suffering with slowly vanishes. Okay, and that's really so all we're trying to do is map out who uses what. It's a second map. First, second two. What else do you want? You want to have a scope map. You've got various stuff to test. You've got various expectations. You might represent them as your acceptance criteria. I call them as cleanliness criteria, whatever you want. But basically, you want to have some notion of a well-formed criteria to say, okay, I am testing this for something like this. If it's vague, you try to explore a little bit and find out. If it is not yet known, you hopefully will get that sometime. If it's perfectly clear, great, you can do that right away. Depends. Right? And as time progresses in the development life cycle, things hopefully become clearer. There's no such thing as a perfect clarity. We know that now for sure. So what you're really doing is, what do you test for what? So you really want a simple map, a connection between, okay, this feature or this user story or this epic needs to satisfy ABC. Some of them may relate to functional aspects, some of them relate to non-functional aspects, depends on what you want. And that again is is obviously a connection to the context of persona, because now you're saying, okay, this guy values that attribute more than this guy values the same attribute. And that's how it works. So it's just a simple connection between the four entities, right? Third one, what happened now? Third one really is about an interaction map. There are various entities. They are not isolated pieces. There is interactions between them. They affect each other. It's not that we have finished the piece of code and left it standalone. We modify it. We constantly adjust it. We constantly refactor it. So obviously stuff is going to get affected. Obviously you got to regress. But the real question is, well, stuff changes, right? So what's the big fun in doing too much work? Why do we have to kind of retest like crazy? What will help us to be a little more sensitive to the entire process, right? And therefore you're trying to look out for the next map, trying to understand before I even jump along, can I understand a bit of an interaction map so that I know, okay, maybe this I should, this I shouldn't, this I should do for this but not this. And therefore you get a better idea of maybe this feature affects this flow, this feature affects some other feature, and in the effect you probably try to figure out what does it affect. Is it the functional part or the non-functional part, and therefore try to go through this process, right? If there is a tool to help you do the job, exploit it. If it is difficult to use an external tool, a software tool to do this job, well, you have to think through a little bit. Or if you got to have a dialogue with somebody to understand the internals to make a particular call, you will do that. So all these are basically information sources that you might use and make appropriate calls. But what are you trying to do? Construct another map, which is basically an interaction map. Now, having said that there are potentially different environments, you really want to construct a simple map of environment. What are the various environment combinations that you need to run it on? And therefore you're trying to put down and say, okay, maybe there is an environment set 1 and there is an environment set 2. And that's really where. So if you go look back, all we did was who, what for, where. Right? Simple standard questions that we ask day in and day out on anything that we do. There's nothing very profound about it. There's nothing profound about testing. We just make it far more mysterious than what we ever want it to be. Right? It's a fairly straightforward, simple stuff. It just takes a fair degree of consistency in the way you think and the way you act. So what have I done now? All I have done is a bit of a reconnaissance. So maybe if it is just a little feature that I